Prime Minister Netanyahu has for a long time thought that Iran is the principal threat to Israel. He has wanted to degrade its military capability, in addition to denying it nuclear and missile capability for the future. And if a regime change can be inspired, he has been wanting to do that for a long time. Successive American presidents have actually pushed back on the idea of preemptive war. Prime Minister Netanyahu calculated that President Trump might be the last American president who is willing to go along with him in doing a preemptive war against Iran. Moreover, Netanyahu realizes that this may be his last chance to do what he wanted to do. So he persuaded Trump. Trump didn't prepare too much for this war. I've said it before that President Trump gave 4 different reasons for what he intended to do: degrade the nuclear capability, regime change, change of regime behavior, and liberation of the Iranian people. I don't think that any of those goals is going to be achieved. There will be a setback to Iran, of course, economically and in terms of its military capability, but there will also be a huge price paid by the entire region because of this misadventure. Look, constant bombing and a long-term bombing campaign will have some effect on the capability of the country that is being bombed. So Iran has definitely been affected. Iran's missile capability has definitely been degraded. Its overall military capacity has been degraded. But I'm told that Iran has what it calls Mosaic defense, which basically means that instead of a central command and control system where the decapitation of the top actually affects the day-to-day fighting, they have basically dispersed it in the field, which is why we still see some resistance and some fighting. The expectation that the top leader will say, okay, enough, I'm going to surrender, is not going to be fulfilled. But Iran and the US have achieved the goal of seriously degrading Iran's military capability. Iran, in the meantime, by threatening its Gulf neighbors, has also sowed the seed of a long-term problem. All of these neighbors were and could be partners of Iran. They have differences with Iran, they have disagreed with Iran in the past, but none of them ever wanted to be part of a war against Iran, and none of them have allowed their bases to be used against Iran. Yet Iran targeted them, thinking that that will be the way to get America to stop bombing Iran. I think that this will be one of the long-term outcomes of this war. The Arab Gulf countries and their willingness to trust Israel and the United States has taken a bit of a hit in this war, but their ability to trust Iran has completely eroded, and that will hurt Iran in the long term. I think all 3 protagonists in this war, Iran, United States, and Israel, have lost some standing in the Arab Gulf region. First of all, the retaliation targeting Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain has no effect on Israel. Israel doesn't care about anybody else. It doesn't deter America either, although the Arab countries had thought that America would be more caring towards them than it has been. And in terms of getting any serious targets, it hasn't succeeded. It hasn't. The Arab countries did not allow their bases to be used, and that should have been enough for Iran. The worst case scenario would be if the Arab countries decide that they have to enter the war, and that would really escalate. So therefore, it's best to try and de-escalate before that situation happens, and attacking non-combatants, countries that are not in that particular war, is never a wise move. It's never a good idea. I think that the calculus of the Arab Gulf countries is that this is a war between one of our neighbors, Iran, and the United States and Israel. Iran has capriciously and wrongly acted against us. But by entering the war, we will only escalate things, whereas it is in the interest of all Arab Gulf countries, as well as the rest of the world, to actually de-escalate. Look, the cost of this war is being borne by the whole world. The oil price rise is going to affect everyone, from Japan all the way to Europe and America. So therefore, it is one of those situations where the wise thing is to de-escalate, not to escalate. And I think the Arab countries so far have constantly called for de-escalation. They have criticized Iran. They have said we have the right to strike back, but they haven't struck back. Now, as far as capabilities are concerned, look, all of these countries have significant military assets, which they are capable of deploying. In addition, Saudi Arabia has a strategic security partnership with Pakistan, which it has not yet invoked to demand that Pakistan come and fight for it. So all of those different options are there for the Gulf countries, and they have chosen not to exercise it because they often tend to think long term. Look, it's very interesting. All the regional players are thinking long term. The only players who are not thinking long term are America and Israel. They think that this is something that we can accomplish and we can go back to normal. They may be able to accomplish some of their objectives, but they aren't going back to normal. The so-called excess of resistance has definitely been weakened. Many of their leaders are dead. Their military capabilities are much smaller. Then the June war, the 12-day war that happened in June, that eroded Iran's capabilities. And once Iran's capabilities are eroded, Iran's first priority becomes building up the capacity to defend itself or to fight itself rather than to help its proxies. So therefore, the proxies are realizing that Iran could not help them in June when the Americans and the Israelis struck them, and it won't be able to help them. So they would rather keep their powder dry to fight another day. Iran also has to rethink this whole strategy. This desire to just be the firebrand leader of the Ummah and have proxies, which irritate the countries where those proxies operate. Those countries have legitimate governments, and the proxies, the governments don't like the proxies. And so having those proxies, trying to meddle in other people's affairs, that is the reason why Iran doesn't have the support it could have had if it did not antagonize its own neighbors, if it did not cause disruption in other countries through proxies. Iran's most powerful institution right now is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC. And Mujtaba Khamenei has had a close relationship with the IRGC. So for IRGC to have total autonomy, not be restrained by anybody, not be restrained by the president, by the parliament, by the judiciary, or by even the supreme leader, it's convenient for them to have Mujtaba Khamenei as the supreme leader. On the other hand, it's also an act of defiance. So it fits in perfectly with the plans of anybody who wants to keep Iran going, not as a functioning nation that pays attention to the well-being of its populace, but as an ideological nation for whom its ideological slogans and its ideological positions are more important. And the IRGC represents that trend, and Mujtaba Khamenei is the bridge between the IRGC and the Iranian theocracy. The international order is definitely under a huge challenge. America was the biggest supporter of the international order. When the UN was created, it was the US that provided the economic backbone at that time. If you remember, at the end of the Second World War, everybody was exhausted. No one had the resources. They provided the headquarters. That's why the headquarters were in New York. The United States provided the headquarters. They provided the bulk of the budget, etc. Over the years, America's right wing has become very critical of the United Nations because one of the mistakes I think the United Nations as an institution made was that it became a talking shop for grievances rather than for solving problems. Problems, uh, Problem solving sometimes requires that those problems you can't solve, you just put them aside. But countries were able to get votes in the General Assembly, use that as a forum for bashing the United States and Israel. And that resulted in America's commitment to the United Nations and international institutions eroding. That erosion has taken place over several years, but under President Trump, it is now nearly total. You must have seen the statement of the UN Secretary General not long ago about how the UN was not able to meet its budgetary requirements without American funding coming in. So when the institution has degraded significantly, when the others in the international order have relied far too long on a single security provider instead of building their own military capabilities, thinking that the liberal order will sustain itself forever with American backing, then this is the result. And so I don't think that beyond condemnation and criticism, there will be much going on because the international order is weak right now. It is not in a good shape. Europe, which should have built its military capability alongside being part of American alliances instead of total reliance on the United States, and could have been the balancer in the liberal international order to America going to right wing or any other country going to right wing. It doesn't have the muscle. China and Russia have their own goals and their own plans for the world. And they would rather have a more dispersed global order than a centralized one. And so, therefore, they don't want to get into the business of putting people on trial for human rights violations, etc., because at some stage, their own people will end up being tried for the same violation. So, yes, unfortunately, we are in the state that in the Million dialogue, the famous line, the powerful will do what they can, and the weak must endure what they must. I think economic pressures are definitely a factor. And look, President Trump is not a trained is not a person trained in governance. He thinks like a businessman, and he's very good at formulating short comments, both on social media and mainstream media. So his statements change all the time, and this is another change. I would think that it helped get the stock market back on track a little bit, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be his policy because you never know what his policy will be from what he says. Yeah, Washington is not what it used to be. It's not a city where decisions are made through a lot of discussion, deliberation, think tank input, institutional input from various US institutions. President Trump does not like the US intelligence community because it suspected him of links with the Russian leadership at one point. He doesn't like the Pentagon leadership. He has removed far more generals from their positions than any other president does within a year or two of coming to office. So therefore, to say why has Washington done this is not necessarily the right question to ask. The only question to ask is why has Trump done it? And I think with President Trump, there is only one reason always. If he thinks he can do it and get away with it and get applause at the end of it with less cost to him, he does. So he went along with the plans of Prime Minister Netanyahu because he thought that there is a opportunity here. If regime change occurs, if something changes in Iran, if he will get bragging rights. And if it doesn't happen and everything goes wrong, at some point he will declare victory and come back For him, this is a relatively low-cost operation. That 7 Americans have died doesn't really matter that much to him, and the cost doesn't matter much to him because that's the way he thinks. I think that China and Russia both want to avoid a great power confrontation. That is why, if they do support Iran, it will be quietly and secretly. It will not be done publicly. But they do see some gains for themselves in a situation in which Iran just keeps standing. Look here, because the objective that has been declared is the destruction of someone, then if that someone keeps standing, that someone can also declare victory. We survived. I am still standing, as the Elton John song goes. So I can see Mujtaba Khamenei singing that in Farsi a few days from now, if they survive all of this, however much destruction might have come. The unfortunate part is that these days, the destruction that affects the people no longer affects the leaders. And in many situations, we see leaders being reckless with the cost that their people and their nations have to pay. First of all, you must remember that when Field Marshal Asim Munir met President Trump for the first time, President Trump said, "Oh, he gave me his perspective on Iran, and that was very interesting." I don't know if you recall that. Which basically means that Pakistan has been relatively consistent in telling the Americans that, you may not get what you want in Iran. We are their neighbor. We understand them better. We have much more regular contact with them and much better intelligence and information. And the fact that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif became the third world leader to congratulate Mujtaba Khamenei on being elected supreme leader after President Putin and President Xi of China. The fourth one is the Sultan of Oman. So that shows that Pakistan's calculus is that the regime is not collapsing and it will survive all this. If that is the case, then Pakistan certainly doesn't want to be seen as one of those actors that helped the Americans and the Israelis cause destruction in Iran without anything being achieved. In case of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, Pakistan has been very clear in condemning Iranian attacks on them. And Pakistan can actually be a good channel for all of them to talk to Iran and tell them that this is not really what you need to do. This is not what is the logical and the reasonable course. And that is something that helps Pakistan balance the situation with the Arab countries as well. That's it. War always affects not only the country where the war takes place, but also its neighbors. Whether it's an influx of refugees from Iran, whether it is people in Pakistan who are angry with the United States and Iran, and it doesn't only mean the Shia population of Pakistan, which is said to be between 15 to 20% of our total population, but also others. Pakistan does have a very strong streak of anti-Americanism, always has had, and there is hardly any public sympathy or support for Israel in Pakistan. So therefore, the potential for volunteers going into Iran, which Pakistan will have to stop at its borders, the potential for Pakistan being dragged into the conflict if it becomes longer because of its commitments to Saudi Arabia, because of its relationship with Arab countries. All of that is very much there. On the other hand, there is also, I can imagine, I don't think like the generals do, but I can imagine Pakistan generals in Rawalpindi seeing an opportunity as well. The Gulf region will feel more insecure vis-a-vis Iran. They will feel less able to rely on the United States. And so they would be looking for a secondary deterrent. And that's what Pakistan signed the strategic partnership agreement with Saudi Arabia for, to become that secondary deterrent, the secondary source of providing security. And that may be something that Pakistan's policy planners might be looking at right now. Well, Pakistan's foreign policy priorities don't change that much. Pakistan just tweaks them. Uh, Pakistan's biggest problem is that it's a cash poor country. It has a persistent deficit, and therefore it's always looking for ways of bolstering that while maintaining its security capabilities, especially vis-a-vis India. And so I don't think any of that will change. The only question will be who are the new partners in that, and is there an opportunity that can be put to use? And I think that that's what Pakistan's leaders will look at as a result of this. However, they will come under pressure. The real balancing act that they will have to do is between China and the United States. That can't run on forever. The China-US rivalry is real. Russia and China have an unbreakable bond right now. And the United States, under President Trump in particular, is slightly more aggressive and assertive, and thinks that it has more capabilities than it has so far demonstrated. So all of those factors may lead to a situation where there would be demands of Pakistan, which Pakistan will not be able to fulfill, may not want to fulfill. Pakistan also has to be cautious about new axes being created. For example, it's not a coincidence Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu are close. Normally, Iran and India were pretty close, but this time Prime Minister Modi has not yet even greeted the supreme leader of Iran. So those are also factors that should be weighed in Islamabad in relation to the future.